So, as a part of introduction to intellectual property rights, this particular lecture is trying to discuss the application part of intellectual property rights. So, the brief outline of this presentation is introducing the intellectual property rights, its relationship with business, biotechnology, pharmaceutical, science and technology, livestock sector, agriculture, and then conclusion. So, what is basically as we have seen that intellectual property is the creation of mind. It has not only the moral value, but also the commercial and economic value. Since there are economic value involved in intellectual property rights, so everybody is trying to basically really own this type of intellectual property rights, and they want to really get the benefit from investing in innovations and intellectual exercise. So, since there are economic values of IPR, since there are economic values of intellectual property rights, so a fair return on the investment is anticipated with a strong IPR protection. So, all intellectual property rights, whether it is patent, copyright, trademark, trade secrets, industrial design, they all need proper protection. Because the moment intellectual property rights are not protected properly, you have a chance to get disincentive. Intellectual property rights provides incentives, but the moment protection is not available or the protection is weak, you have disincentive from the IPR, disincentives of not protecting the intellectual property rights. So, this type of disincentive disincentives for not protecting IPR, this really leads to a condition of discouraging the creative activity. So, application of intellectual property right is crucial to understand, and its impact can be far reaching. From this discussion, we can see that how intellectual property rights are really important to understand. Because the protection of IPR, intellectual property rights, are basically the advancement of investment in knowledge production and innovation. Such protection really advances the country's economy's level of investment in knowledge production and innovation. The moment you do not have a protection, that is why the TRIPS agreement is making hard to convince all the economies of the world that what are basically the way of protection which you can provide to any of the innovators, whether it is domestic innovators or outside innovators. And the MFN, most favored nation and national treatment, two basic principles of WTO, is part of the IPR protection, because it leads to the marketization of innovation. The moment you have advancement of investment in knowledge production and innovation, the final output of that innovation is going to be marketed. And so, the purpose of IPR protection is not only to have more and more investment in knowledge production and innovation, but to also have more marketization of such innovations to the world, because this intellectual property right is not alone, but it is well connected with the trade. So, it is TRIPS, trade related intellectual property rights. So, it is not separated, but it is connected to the trade. And when we say trade today, it is the global trade, it is the international trade, it is the trade which is more faster in last 30 years, last 3-4 decades. So, this facilitates the creativity and inventions to the world, because a strong protection only leads to facilitate the more and more creations and more and more innovations. And one more protection is, one more purpose of the IPR protection is resolving the information asymmetries. So, if it is not protected, then the firm or the individual or the creator, the innovator, which has the way to take the benefit of trade secrets or to get the idea of the patent material or to have the infringement of the copyrights, they are really running a parallel show of non intellectual property right products, and the moment such a parallel show is going on, the major setback is for those people who had really produced intellectual property products for the market. So, the purpose of IPR protection is very much clear, and so the application is well connected with the protection. So, intellectual property has become the major source of competitive advantage for all business today. We can say that business and intellectual property is the part of the same coin. So, entrepreneurs required to recognize such important and marketable intangible properties in an appropriate way. So, any entrepreneur who wish to start a production process, they must be knowing this property which is intangible in nature, and it determines the future of the business. More you are getting a legalized product, more you are getting a IP you can say IP enabled product, IP protected product, you are in the process of globalizing your products at more faster scale. So, without proper, adequate and legalized IPR protection and enforcement framework, business will no longer sustain. You have invested a lot in research and development, but the entire investment is not getting any incentive in the globalized market if the country's system of protecting the intellectual property rights are very weak. So, with regards to the fashion industry, as one of the example today, we can see that how Adidas, Nike and other brands are showing sophisticated intellectual inventiveness and expertise recognized their global brands in the market today. Textile industry is one of the example of involving such innovations, which is on a very faster scale. So, one of the IP intellectual property may be the trade secrets, software tools for the fashion designing. It may be the part of the trade secrets, or some of the modern fashion business rely on the sophisticated software based business models. So, these trade secrets are the core of the entire fashion industry today. Not only the fashion industry, but also the food and packed food industry and other beverage industry is completely dependent today on the trade secrets and unique business modeling. Coca-Cola is one of the example where the trade secrets are really making this particular firm becoming more and more globally recognized and making this firm more and more profitable today. So, apart from the industry and business relation of the intellectual property right, we cannot really disagree with the association of intellectual property rights with the biotechnology. So, IPR, intellectual property rights for biotechnology, is currently in the development phase. Traditionally, living organisms were largely excluded from the protection. Now, attitudes and laws are changing everywhere, and these changes are largely taken place in the developed countries. Not only the developed countries, but developing countries are now competing in the new biotechnological markets. Some of the developing countries are really working hard to compete with the biotechnology markets with the developed one, and national laws in developing countries are changing in order to protect and encourage investment in biotechnology. So, we find here that intellectual property rights are well connected with the biotechnology, and there are currently two main system of protection for biotechnology. One is the rights in plant varieties, and the second one is the patents. Both system provides exclusive time limited rights of the exploitation. Recent development, especially in biotechnology sector, that includes the genetic engineering, cloning, recombinant DNA, cell fusion and monoclonal antibody technology. It has raised fundamental social and moral questions and created problems in the entire debate of intellectual property rights. So, this is all because of the experiments related to the biotechnology, and this shows that how intellectual property rights are not alone important for the business and industry, but it also important for the biotechnology. And not, when we say biotechnology, it is not only the biotechnology, but it again go back to the society, and it really have various questions for the people to ask, that if cloning is being done and if DNA and cell fusion is being progressed, that what will be the future of the human body. One of the important interrelationship with the IPR and pharmaceutical industry, IPR rights can offer crucial motivation for the advancement of the new drugs and medicines in the health sector. And we have seen that how new drugs are really coming out and how it is able to fight with the new types of diseases such as cancer and AIDS and some of the other diseases. So, IP intellectual property system is currently evolving for the pharmaceutical industry. It helps the pharmaceutical industry because lots of incentives are really available in the pharma sector. Because a firm is having a pharma firm is having a patent rights, and then that patent rights provide them an opportunity to go around the market, and they can really be the any part of the world is monopolized by a single firm. So, this patent gives you an opportunity to connect your products not only in one part of the world, but the entire part of the world, and so for time being, for certain period of time, you are one of the monopoly firm. You are one of the monopoly firm due to one of the monopoly firm due to the patent rights. So, this patent and monopoly is interconnected, and the periphery of the market is today centralized, especially the market of pharmaceutical sector is centralized with the main focus on patenting the medicine. So, it is one of the important point to understand that how IPR, intellectual property rights, and pharmaceutical sectors are one of the interlinked sectors, because it provides a monopoly power to a firm to produce the product, understanding the need of the drugs, not only to specific to a country specific, but also globally recognized drugs. So, essential and life saving drugs become too costly, because when we say monopoly firm, a patent makes a firm monopoly, a pharma firm is becoming the monopoly firm. So, as we know that in general economics, we know that a monopoly is a situation where a single firm is able to control the entire market. So, the market is in the hand of one firm, owner is single, and that ownership is not only in terms of the price, but that ownership is also in terms of determining or fixing the quantity. And not only that, you have a monopoly for a specific period, for a set time. So, you can have a complete strategy, and you are automatically having a natural monopoly, because your cost is not going to add much, but ultimately you are the single firm available in the market, and you have all chances of expanding the product for many years. So, in that condition, we find today that costly drugs are not affordable for the poor people living in developing and least developed countries of sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia and Latin America. And many challenges remains to be resolved, but we see that there is a threat of monopoly within the pharmaceutical industry, and this shows the IPR, how IPR is, how patent is really controlling the pharmaceutical industry today. We see that in intellectual property rights is one of the important means for the science and technology innovations, and it is one of the important means used by the firms to help protect their investment in innovation. National governments have been using these instruments of intellectual property rights for centuries for the economic and industrial development of the country. So, for the all scientific development, especially the firm is determined largely by the ability to develop, commercialize and to capture the economic benefits for scientific and technological innovations. So, this is one of the major interconnection which we are finding today, that IPR and science and technology. We cannot really ignore the discussion on the interlinkages of intellectual property rights and livestock and this basically intellectual property is crucial for livestock sector, more specifically patents, geographical indications, trademarks and trade secrets. So, the patent in livestock can be granted for gene sequence related to the genetic markets. For example, Egmark company from New Zealand has asserted patent on Burula gene, and this gene determines the ovulation rate in sheep. So, this shows that how intellectual property is not static, but it is dynamic from business to industry, industry to biotechnology, biotechnology to pharmaceutical sector, and now in the livestock sector. Another instances is Monsanto, which has 12 patents on pig breeding currently waiting at WIPO. There are lively debates on patents on livestock sector. In this connection, the German Veterinary Council denied patents on livestock on the ground of welfare of animals. So, genetic material cannot be a registered trademark, but a particular type of product from a specific variety can be registered. For instance, Angus beef is one of the example today which is registered as the trademark. So, trade secrets do not ascertain rights over genetic property. However, poultry industry and pig breeding companies have succeeded in using these rights. Again, genetic resources are not directly protected by the means of geographical indication, but can attach importance to products of a specific breed from a distinct area. We find here that large number of examples we are finding, especially in the livestock sector, and where we do not have a previous example, but we are finding the new examples where the trademarks or where the patents or where trade secrets are being authorized to the innovators. For example, Roquefort cheese can be prepared solely from the Lacunaise sheep milk that comes under the IPR relationship with the livestock sector, but it is the example of the geographical indication. Karu lamb and Chos Malal goat meat Argentina are few other examples in this connection. So, we find here that when we talk about the livestock sector, we cannot really ignore the agriculture, because ultimately with the growing population, which is currently close to 7 billion, is expected to reach more than 8 billion by 2030. In this regard, estimates of food and agriculture organization highlights that world food grains production should be increased from the current level of 2 billion tons to 3 billion tons by 2030. So, agriculture is one of the important activity in least developed country and also in the developing country. When we compare the agriculture with the developed country, we find out that agriculture is not the prime activity for mass population in developed country, but we find here that it is a activity related to the mass population in developing and least developed countries. But the problem of shortage of food grains can be tackled by the genetic engineering and genetically modified crops. GM crops is in news today, and some 2.5 decades before genetic engineering became a part of breeding activity, it was not at all one of the debatable and one of the topic for the intellectual property rights, but with the growth of research in genetically modified sector, especially in food related sector, we find today that intellectual property right and agriculture cannot be separated. Agriculture is more closely attached with the intellectual property rights. So, patents on plants and animals or their parts such as genes or gene sequences become important today when we talk about the agriculture. So, the UPOV Convention of 1961, International Union of the Protection of New Variety of Plant, that has established protection of intellectual property rights for plant breeders, at the same time permitting other breeders to use the material free of charge for their own breeding purpose. So, we find today that few country, around more than 30 countries are active today to have new types of seed production and breeding the plants, and plant breeders are very active in some of the country, because they are taking this activity as one of the activity for their survival and their income growth, because they are looking for other developing and least developed country where they can sell their newly developed plants, and where they can really show their capability to sell the seeds. So, in that connection we find that where the developed countries are trying hard, especially in that 32 countries circle, we find out most of the developed countries are trying their best to sell the products, to sell the plants varieties and to sell the new types of seeds to the market, because they find it that agriculture is not basically the livelihood for them, but agriculture is not less than industry for them, and they are trying to really capture the world population who are really busy in agriculture production. They are targeting those population to get the seeds consumed and new plant consumed, and so they are having a market for their production. But here also we find that intellectual property do play an important role through the patent rights and through the trademarks. They are trying to really have monopoly over their product, and they are trying to capture the agriculture market in developing and least developed countries. So, intellectual property rights, when we say intellectual property rights, it is one of the collection of bunch of rights. It is not only a single patent or single copyright, but the bunch of rights which really connects varieties of sectors today. The application of these intellectual properties are not limited to a certain specific sectors, but you name the sector, whether it is electronic sector, whether it is manufacturing sector, whether it is car manufacturing, whether it is agriculture, whether it is biotechnology, pharmaceutical, or the sectors like publication or filmmaking. We find that there is a intellectual property involved in each of the sectors, and that is why the TRIPS agreement, which is trade related intellectual property rights agreement, that has worked really hard to convince the world community that you cannot survive without the TRIPS agreement, because every country has certain certain intellectual property products which can really help them to really become the monopoly for certain years. And in that connection, when the countries are looking for the future of certain products in the global market, they are really convinced to become the part of the TRIPS agreement, and so that they became the part of the TRIPS agreement. TRIPS agreement was one of the most controversial agreement in the world, and various countries were tried their best to argue that TRIPS is not going to help them, and TRIPS has certain problem for the public health. TRIPS is really not good for the mass population in terms of agriculture, but ultimately what is the final result? The final result is the TRIPS agreement is signed by different countries, because different countries has looked in a different way about the benefits of the TRIPS agreement, and the agreement is in place. WTO is monitoring this TRIPS agreement after 1995, and we find out that varieties of problems and issues are coming out, but the application of intellectual property rights are so strong, application of intellectual property rights are so wide that it is not really static to a particular sector like agriculture, but it is dynamic from agriculture to agro based industry, from agro based industry to manufacturing sector, from car manufacturing to medicine manufacturing, and from software to hardware, and publication to the digital world. And we find that this is going to be a very challenging topic today, intellectual property rights, and world has wide range of IPR applications today, and we cannot ignore the application of intellectual property rights anymore. So, as a part of a introductory lecture on intellectual property rights, I thought to bring this particular topic, application of intellectual property rights, as one of the topic which may give you more interesting results. So, for more details you can find out these linkages where links where you can read some of the good debate and article. Thank you.